We're back. We're live. We're here at the 3 o'clock block on Thursday afternoon at Think Tech Talks. Our show today is Community Matters. This time it's a larger community, the national community. We're talking today with Michael Harpold by Skype. He's a longtime INS Border Patrol employee, and he has a lot to say. And he has interesting thoughts and positions on immigration reform. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you. I'm certainly pleased to be here.
So let me ask you at first to tell us, who you are. I mean, I don't think, people in Hawaii have not, they may have met INS employees, but they haven't met a lot of Border Patrol agents. How has it been for you in your career?
Well, I started my career 51 years ago. Actually, I tell people 50 years and 80 pounds ago. But at any rate, I started on the Mexican border down at Calexico, California. It's inland from San Diego. And riding a Jeep, carrying a six-shooter, every night, patrolling 40 miles of open border. Back in those years, it was very quiet.
Why did you go into it?
Well, I was at the University of Wisconsin and not doing terribly well in chemistry.
Okay.
And I had 3 children to feed, and this was a very good opportunity. It was back in the years when John Kennedy was saying that, ask what you can do for your country, and coming into government service was just really appealed to an individual like myself to do something and serve your country. Yeah. So
I was there. I know what you mean. I joined the Coast Guard in those years, and it was all about serving the country. And the federal government was a great place to be. Everybody loved the federal government, especially the people working for the federal government.
That's true. And gosh, I hope sometime in the future we can get back to that.
Yes. Anyway, so, okay, you've had a long career. Tell us about the career, because, what I'm really interested in is in the things that formed your thinking. You were exposed to the Mexican border, you were exposed to Mexican immigrants, legal and otherwise. You were exposed to, I don't know, you'll have to tell us. What was it like, and how did it change your thinking?
Well, it was very different for me. I'd never seen people bending over in a hot sun, chopping weeds with a short-handled hoe, and I'd never seen that, and I'd never lived in a community before where somehow the other Anglo was prized and everything else was kind of not prized. So that was my first encounter, and I had to admire these Mexican men. I got down there at the end of the old Bracero program, which was a Mexican temporary worker program. That ended in 1964. Mm-hmm. And the people who had previously come to work legally started coming back illegally. But there was certain, I think, that all of us in the patrol admired deep down, and that was the stoicism, the sense of taking care of one's family, the pride of workmanship, and even though we were charged with enforcing the law, with arresting them and sending them back to Mexico, it was universal that there was a certain human level admiration for what these folks were going through.
You think it's the same today in the Border Patrol?
I hope so. I know that drugs have become a huge impact on the patrol. The drug war started we lost the control of the border, when we beginning in 1965, and drugs came in a big way. I think the drug war started I tell you when I count the drug war starting, and that was in June of 1967. And it was when 2 Border Patrol officers were ambushed on a mountain road up behind San Diego and driven over into the Anza Borrego Desert, chained together and executed.
Ooh.
That was in 1967. And I just checked earlier today, and since then, 74 Border Patrol officers, men and women, have given their lives. But, before 67, in my first years in Calexico, California, only one time did I ever see a drug case, and that was with 2 ounces of heroin, which was serious enough. But it certainly did not have the prevalence, and certainly was not so dominating of the Border Patrol's operations as it is today. Mm. On another side, of course, everyone is concerned about how we deal with people. Today, 57% of Border Patrol agents are of Hispanic background or ancestry. Mm-hmm. And I certainly hope, I'm long removed from those early days, but I certainly hope, and everything I see is the attitudes towards the people they have to deal with continues.
Mm-hmm. When did you leave the Border Patrol?
Actually, I left the Border Patrol. From Calexico, I went I transferred to Bakersfield, California. That was in May of 1965. And that was interesting because that summer, the Grape Strike started. It started in the Coachella Valley and it moved north as the grapes ripened. Mm-hmm. And then in September in Delano was 30 miles from Bakersfield and part of the area where I was assigned to check field crews, farm and ranch.
This is all agricultural in that area, right?
Agriculture, southern Endless and San Joaquin Valley.
Yeah.
Cesar Chavez and the United Farmworkers, and then Larry Itliong and the Filipino Farmworkers went out on strike that fall. And I was there for all of that for the first 3 years of the Grape Strike. I met Cesar Chavez numerous times, as well as Larry Itliong, who is the president of the Filipino Farm Workers Association.
What do you think? What did you think of them?
I admired them. By that time, I was concerned enough about farm workers and their cause that I was very much a backer. Cesar was very concerned about the presence of illegal workers. He believed that, and rightly so, that farmers, if they were given the opportunity, would hire illegal immigrants.
Cheaper.
And because they could get them cheaper. And he couldn't organize them because the illegal workers basically wanted a paycheck. They wanted their pay, they wanted to get in, they wanted to be here temporarily, earn a little money, and go back to Mexico. What he was trying to do, when he started organizing, before the strike, he was organizing around a death benefit, believe it or not. It was a mutual aid type thing where you kicked in, and if a member died, then his family would get a pot of money, a few $100s. But for migrant workers, and these are U.S. workers, that was a very important thing, is to be able to take care of, or have your family taken care of, at least for burial expenses and stuff. But he was interested in things like that. He was interested in health benefits. And then in his early contracts, in the contracts, he got the growers to support and fund health clinics for farm workers. He was also interested in hireback clauses, which would guarantee a worker a preference. The next season came around and it was time to hire workers again. If they worked there in the past, they got preferences. That did a lot to help keep to a minimum migrating for work. In 1965, the typical farm worker earned about $3,000 a year, but had to move 8 times during the course of the year in order to earn that median income.
Why?
Because of the harvest schedule. So different crops came in at different times. Like for the example, the grapes began in the Coachella Valley in July. The harvest would move north up into the southern San Joaquin and then up to the Livermore, the Napa Valley region by October. Well, okay, once the harvest is over, then the worker has 10 more months of the year that he's got to support his family. Okay, well, what's next? Well, in the winter months, there wasn't much. They were pruning grapes and things like that. And then come next spring, there would be citrus would come in, strawberries, other berry crops, and peaches through the summer. So, all this required moving. I remember one night in Bakersfield, I stopped into a service station. I was in uniform. It was about 10 o'clock at night. And there was this young black guy there with an old Buick and his wife, and they had several kids, and her sister and several more kids. There were about 8 people in that Buick. And he was trying to get 4 wheels, four serviceable tires on his car. And I said, "Where are you going?" He says, "Well, I'm going down to Yuma." And I said, "What are you going to do down there?" He says, "Well, I'm going to pick melons." And I said, "Well, right down the road here in Mettler, they're picking lettuce. So why don't you go down there?" And he said, he told me what I already knew. He said, "Well, that's a Mexican job." And I said, "Well, in 3 weeks, citrus is going to come in over here in Edison, which is just 10 miles away." He says, "Well, what am I going to do in the meantime?" So for 3 weeks, he had to go down to Yuma, which was 300 miles away, and somehow or the other house his family down there while he worked. And then 3 weeks later, come back up to the Bakersfield area for the winter citrus in the Edison area. And this was
It's a hard life.
It's a hard life, and it was worse on the children. And that's affected me a great deal. You asked me earlier how I felt about some of these things. And in nearby Arvin, California, there was a farm labor camp, Sunset Camp. And anyone who's read John Steinbeck will recognize Sunset Camp. That was a labor camp that Steinbeck wrote about in Grapes of Wrath. In 1965, that was still open. It was run by the city of Arvin, and it was still housing migrant families. And while I was there, a team of sociologists went into Sunset Camp, a husband and wife team, and they tried to measure the aspiration level of the children of the migrant workers there. And the most common aspiration they found was to get out in the field and work beside the father. The highest aspiration level they could find was not to be a policeman or a fireman or a shoe clerk or a teacher, but to be a crew boss. And that always troubled me. It troubles me still today. And I've never believed that those children did not have dreams. And in my book, in Jumping the Line, one of my characters is, in fact, one of those children. And I've certainly equipped him with dreams, through the book. But that was one of the really detrimental things about migrant labor, and it still is, because it is still a very real thing, and the educating of these children is still a problem.
Michael, you got a copy of the book handy? Can you just show it to us on the screen?
Well, let's see. If I can step off screen for just a minute.
Sure.
Oh, here we go. Yeah, I'll hold it up here. It's
Okay, Jumping the Line. Michael Harpold. It's a novel?
It's a novel. I've always wanted to write about this, about what I saw and what I felt and everything like that. And I tried to write nonfiction. And I just couldn't get my hands and my mind around the whole thing through just, nonfiction description. And so I decided to do like Steinbeck and tell the story through characters. And my principal protagonist is a Mexican farmer who returns to the U.S. after the Bracero program illegally and works. And my other protagonist is the son of a Mexican-American farm worker.
Your book is available on Amazon?
On Amazon.
That's great. Okay, we're going to take a short break, Michael. Then we're going to come back and talk with Michael Harpold, a longtime INS Border Patrol employee who wrote a book called Jumping the Line and who has some very specific feelings on immigration reform. We're going to come back. We're going to ask him about his feelings on immigration reform as it exists today in this country. We'll be right back, Michael. We'll take a 1-minute break.
Aloha, I'm Nicole Horry for Think Tech. For nearly half a century, the Hawaii Foreign Trade Zone No. 9 has brought the benefits of the Foreign Trade Zone program to Hawaii businesses and entrepreneurs. DBET, the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism, operates Hawaii's Foreign Trade Zone program to encourage international business and economic development. The Foreign Trade Zone's mission is to increase the amount of international trading activity in Hawaii, thereby providing employment opportunities for the residents of our island state. For more information, see ftz9.org. I'm Nicole Horry. Mahalo.
Okay, we're back. We're live here on Think Tech Talks, and it's Community Matters. We're talking with Michael Harpold, a longtime Immigration Naturalization Service Border Patrol employee who has stories to tell and who, in fact, wrote a novel called Jumping the Line, which you can find on Amazon right now. We're talking about immigration reform, and Michael's position is, in fact, that both sides, on the conservative side and the liberal side, they're both wrong. And he has some specific ideas for immigration reform. But before we get to that, Michael, just finish up the timeline with us. So you stayed with the Immigration Service for how long? And you got out. Why did you get out? Tell us how it went down the line.
When I was in Bakersfield, I was in the spring of 1968. I went with the U.S. Agency for International Development. I was recruited to go over to Vietnam and be a civilian advisor to the Vietnamese police. And I spent 2 years in Vietnam. And then when I came back, I was reinstated. They no longer had a position for me in Bakersfield, so they reinstated me as an investigator in the San Francisco District Office of the Immigration and Naturalization Service. And from there, I adjudicated applications, petitions, and stuff like that. And then I got involved with the employee union. And for about a 10-year period, I would go back and forth between San Francisco and Washington, D.C. And then I was taken into the central office. We had our first Hispanic commissioner of the INS, Leonel Castillo. Mm-hmm. That was in 1977. And I spent most of 1977 and 78 on his staff in the office in Washington, D.C.
You were having a good career.
Yeah. And then after that, I went back. I was national president of the employee union until 1984. And then I went back to San Francisco as a naturalization examiner for a short, as a supervisor in the San Francisco office. Mm-hmm. From there, I got a little tired of commuting 3 hours every day, and it was just it was really tough to work there. People would line up outside our office at 4 in the morning to get in to get work done, and it was just impossible.
This bothered you?
Well, it was tough, and this office here in Ketchikan, Alaska came open. A little one-man office. And I thought about it, and I thought, do I have the courage to do this? In the end, I did. I came up here. That was in 1984. I had remarried, and my wife moved up here from New Orleans, and I moved up from San Francisco, and we've raised a family here. And I retired from the INS in 1998. But up here, I was responsible for all of Southeast Alaska. I did all of the adjudications, all the applications for immigrant visas, all the applications for naturalization and citizenship. I arrested all the illegal immigrants, and I was just responsible for everything. I did political asylum, orphan adoptions, the whole bit.
Wow, the whole thing.
Yeah, and interestingly, up here, there was not a single day up here that I didn't use Spanish. So it was kind of.
Are you conversant in Spanish?
I have a working ability in Spanish. I wouldn't call myself fluent, but I can do the job in Spanish.
Why do I feel that probably helped you write the Jumping the Line book, eh?
There's a little Spanish in it, but I hired a Spanish-speaking editor to make sure.
Of course, smart. So I got out of that message something I didn't know, and that is that we're talking to you on Skype, but we never know exactly where our Skype correspondents are, and I take it that you're in Ketchikan now.
That's right. It's about 40 degrees, raining pretty good. Wind about 10 to 20 knots from the southeast.
You could have retired anywhere in the country, the world, but you chose Ketchikan. Why?
We came up here, my wife and I came up here, we thought for maybe a year or two, but we just got comfortable. One of the things up here is people count. And I imagine that's that way on every island community. We're on an island here. We're very isolated, and you depend on your neighbors, and your neighbors depend on you. And there's just this feeling, and we have everything here. I mean, this weekend, our theater ballet is putting on a performance of the Nutcracker. Our community chorus and the community orchestra are at the Presbyterian Church are going to have the Handel's Messiah. We've got it all, really.
That's lovely. And you have good broadband. I can talk to you on Skype, and you look like $1 million.
Well, thank you. Our utilities here are all municipally owned. We probably got one of only 3 municipally owned telephone companies in the U.S. Because everything is, we're a long way from, we have no power lines or anything that go anywhere else. It's just everything has to be done right here. All the groceries have to be brought in except for salmon and halibut. But it's good.
Question, just a point of curiosity, because we cover a lot of energy. How do you get your electrical power? Is it from oil?
No, it's hydro.
Okay. You're in a great place for that. But let me move on to the primary subject of our discussion, which is immigration reform now. And you certainly bring a lot to the table. You bring, among other things, your historical experience, but also your appreciation of the social considerations. And I'd like to know why you say, that both sides are wrong. Both the liberals are wrong and the conservatives are wrong. Let's take it one step at a time. Why do you say that the conservatives are wrong on immigration reform, which is stuck in Congress?
I think, their insistence on that there be no amnesty is stopping a more realistic and achievable solution. In years past, of course, the amnesty that everyone hollers about is the one that happened in 1987, which did have a good good deal to do with the failing of immigration policy.
What happened in 1987, Michael?
1987, we allowed everyone who had been here prior to, I think it was 1982, to apply to get a green card. We allowed people who had worked for as few as 100 days in agriculture to apply for a green card. And over 3 million people applied, and most of whom had never been a day in agriculture, including one of the world trade bombers who got his green card because of he claimed he worked in agriculture, but in fact he was a cab driver in New York City.
So it wasn't true.
Wasn't true, but at any rate, in addition to that, we were supposed to implement sanctions against employers who knowingly hired illegal aliens. We did. We started this procedure that everybody knows who's applied for the job in the last 20 years, and that's you fill out this I-9 form attesting that you're a U.S. citizen or authorized to work in the United States. But the second part of that, verifying what was said on those I-9 forms, was never implemented. They have now what they call this E-Verify, this electronic verification system where employers are supposed to call in and check, and many employers do. But of course, those employers who are benefiting from illegal labor and cheap labor, don't. So that's why that whole thing failed, is because we set up a program to verify as a test program, never moved it beyond that. And so that is the first big reason. But getting back to the amnesty thing, over the years, when I first came into the INS back in 62, we had Section 249 of the Immigration Act registry, which allowed a person who had been in the United States prior to 1949 to simply apply for permanent residence, walk into an INS office and apply to become a permanent resident. That was after, 13-year period, that would be in 62. We also had suspension of deportation, which if a person was in the United States for 7 years and in deportation proceedings, if he had a family, and some of the family were born here or one thing or another, and it was going to create a hardship, we allowed him to stay. The judge would allow him to stay. So this is nothing new. In 1940, at the beginning of World War II, we had what was called the Smith Act. It required every alien in the United States to register with the Attorney General. And over 4 million did in a 4-month period. What they did is they went into their post office, they completed a form which was kind of file folder. It was sent off to Washington, D.C. A clerk in an office back there detached the lower right-hand corner, which was about the size of a little smaller than a postcard, and it had the applicant's thumbprint rolled on it. And he would simply stamp it as having received and send it back to the immigrant. And the immigrant had this AR-3, and that was his evidence that he had registered. And he was allowed to stay and work forever. I finally, we would run into these people over the years. I run into many over the course of my career. The last one I ran into was in Juneau, Alaska in 1991, almost 50 years later. And I asked him, I said, why didn't you apply for a green card? I said, there were many opportunities for you to do so. You could have done the amnesty in 87. He says, why? I didn't need to.
I don't do what I don't have to do.
Right. So we've always had this. The idea of giving something to someone is not new. And it's, because we're and it's stopping us. This political insistence on not rewarding these people, quote these people, is stopping us from getting a solution. I'm from Wisconsin. I was born and raised in southwestern Wisconsin. That's dairy country. And, it was all 160, 240 acre dairy farms. Everyone had a dairy herd. They milked anywhere from 19 to maybe 30 cows. Well, I left there. One thing, I couldn't get up in the morning. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life getting up at 6 a.m. and being back at 6 p.m. to milk a dairy herd, So I joined the Army, but at any rate, and that was an option back in those days. I'm sure you know that too. But at any rate, I went back for my 50th high school reunion a few years ago. And some of my classmates and I went into a local bar, which forever had been a farmer bar.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was about 6 o'clock at night, and the place was packed with farmers. And I said, "Who's milking the cows?" And my classmates said, "Well, you've been gone, but we got Mexicans to do that now."
There you go.
So the reality is, we're not going to move out 11.5 million people. They're too embedded and too much a part of our economy, and in many cases our social system and our communities. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, they've been with us too long. They're embedded, as you say, in our society, and it would be very violent to even try to untangle that. Anyway,
Right.
Look, we're going to take a short break, Michael. We're going to take 1 minute break, and we'll be right back to talk more with Michael Harpold, longtime INS Border Patrol employee, about immigration reform as it stands right now today. This is Think Tech Talks. I'm your host, Jay Fidel. We'll be right back after this break. Aloha, I'm Jay Fidel for Think Tech. For nearly half a century, the Hawaiian Foreign Trade Zone, number 9, has brought the benefits of the Foreign Trade Zone program to Hawaii businesses and entrepreneurs. DBED, the Hawaii Department of Business, Economic Development and Tourism, operates Hawaii's Foreign Trade Zone program. It does so to encourage international business and economic development. The Foreign Trade Zone mission is to increase the amount of international trading activity in Hawaii, thereby providing employment opportunities for the residents of our island state. For more information, see ftz9.org. I'm Jay Fidel of Think Tech. We're back, we're live, we're with Michael Harpold. He joins us by Skype from Ketchikan, Alaska. We have a little map in our Think Tech studio, a world map, and we're going to put a little red dot there in Ketchikan now. Michael.
The very southern tip of Alaska.
Okay, thank you. Now I know where to put the dot. He's a
It's
long-time Immigration
an
and Service Border Patrol employee. He joins us to talk about immigration reform, and the basic proposition is that both sides are wrong on immigration reform. Now, you're going to say something about Ketchikan?
It's that small little place. It's an island about 40 miles across.
Okay, well, we're not much bigger here in Oahu. It's an island too, I suppose.
Well, I know there'd be some sort of a bond between us over that.
Well, I think islands have a different sociology.
They do.
I just a short story. When I was in the service, I traveled early on. I was in my early 20s to Wake Island during the Vietnam War, and I remember, joining what amounted to a salon on a given Friday evening, where some of the people who were doing a lot of reading and thinking were present at a dinner party done by the local minister, who later came and settled in Hawaii. Anyway, he explained to me that Wake Island had 2,800 people. Everyone knew each other, and in some ways it was a utopia because it was different, and it was not anonymous. It was personal, and and you cared about everybody on the island, and there was a tremendous social difference between living in a large body of land and living on a small island. And I carried that around from then till now. I'm sure you know what I mean.
I certainly can relate to that. As I said earlier, people count up here, and I'm sure they do on those islands too, every island.
Anyway, so we were talking about your thoughts on why the conservatives are wrong to try to bar people or send them back, as it were. But and the consequences of doing that, of sending them back, would wreak violence on American society. I think that's clear. Not only in places where the concentration of illegal immigrants is high, but in other places too, as a secondary matter. So that's not a great idea. But what about the consequences of not taking any action, of leaving it where it is? Are those acceptable consequences?
Well, the action you take is institute this e-verify system. In other words, put some teeth into an employer sanctions law, which will turn off the job magnet for people to come here illegally. It's in many ways we've screwed up over the last 30 years, and I blame a large part of that over the idea. I think free trade gave us the idea that somehow or the other illegal immigration was good for us because it was bringing more people, and on and on and on. We've got to get past that, and I think the first step is to institute really tough sanctions against employers who employ illegal workers. The other side of that coin, or the other 50% of that, is to enforce. We have 40 million visitors come to the United States every year. As non-immigrant visitors, they're admitted for a period of time, 6 months or whatever, and fully half of the people who are here illegally are these visitors and tourists and temporary workers who have come to the United States and have never gone home. And we have never followed up on that, and there has got to be a tracking. We've got to track those people. We've got to, I don't mean physically track them down the street, but we've got to, besides recording the fact that they're here, someone has got to be responsible for recording the fact that they've left. And if they haven't left and they've violated their status, then they ought to be barred from ever coming back again, or whatever, or whatnot, some sort of sanction of that. But we've got to keep better track of the people that we admit temporarily.
Well, that is really shocking to find out so many people come legally and then abuse their status and stay. But it seems to me that in the 21st century, in the land that developed database technology, we can't make a simple system to net the number of people who come in with the number of people who leave, and find out who isn't accounted for, and then at least have a list of everybody who abused the status, who overstayed. Why can't we do that? I mean, we can NSA can check our every telephone record. Why can't we at least have a list of people who overstayed?
We can do that. We were supposed to have done it back years ago in the late 70s, early 80s. We implemented this visa waiver program. At first, it was 8 countries that we no longer required a visa for, and those people were admitted to the United States for a 90-day period, and the air carrier was supposed to take them back at the end of it and whatnot. But as part of that program, the Immigration Service was supposed to implement a procedure for tracking their departure. It never happened. And that was re-emphasized again in the 87 Act. Never happened. And the only conclusion I can come to, and I think it's a founded conclusion, is that we went through 2 or 3 administrations here. We went through the 80s, or the 90s, and into this century, where we somehow felt that the illegal immigrants were here, were helping our economy, so why should anyone worry? Why should we bother about this problem?
Why should we?
Well, let's get to that. One of the problems, Paul Krugman, who's a New York Times columnist and a Pulitzer Prize winning economist, has said that, if we're going to improve the conditions, the lives of the people who are in the United States, we can't then turn around and bring in the whole world. So there's, there's a finite amount that we can do to improve people's lives, a very finite amount, politically anymore. And we can't, in other words, we can't keep bringing in waves of new immigrants, particularly unskilled or lower skilled immigrants, into a workforce where the job market is not expanding. In fact, it's contracting, and it's just, as I mentioned earlier, Cesar Chavez, one of his big fears was against new waves of immigration that would undermine his efforts to improve the lives of farm workers.
Sure, and that's a central point, isn't it?
That's right. And there's another thing. Let's look back. In the early part of the 20th century, we had this huge wave of immigrants from Europe, and they came to the United States, and that basically ended with World War I. And it was closed off almost entirely in 1923 when the United States implemented what they called the National Origins Quota System. And that was the system that said that only so many immigrants can enter in a proportion to the number of immigrants who were already here.
That was the McCarran-Walters Act?
No, that was, McCarran-Walters Act was 52. This was, I forget the name of the act.
Okay, that was early 20s.
Basically, it shut down immigration except to countries of Northern Europe. It closed off Chinese and Oriental Asian immigration almost entirely. We adopted what they call the Asian Pacific Triangle, where only 100 immigrants a year from all of the countries in Asia. That started back then. Actually, that started earlier. But at any rate, it basically closed down immigration. And it remained closed until 1965, the Kennedy amendments to the Immigration Nationality Act. But during that period, those immigrants, that big wave, there was over 10, 12 million immigrants that came to the United States the first decade of the 20th century. They came at a time of rapid industrialization in the United States, where jobs were easy to get. It also came at a time where it was still possible to buy a farm or homestead a farm in many states. Mm-hmm. So, they were absorbed, with the exception of, during the Depression years. It was, they started in this street sweeping job or cleaning, but they had, an industrial job to move into, or a farm to move on to. And then you had World War II, where everybody was employed. Mm-hmm. And so by the 50s, you had what Tom McCall calls the greatest generation. I mean, this is this is our ideal of immigrant assimilation. They come in, the old boy that comes first, he works hard, and his children get more education than he had and get better off economically than he ever was.
The old story.
The grandchildren, better yet, and the great-grandchildren, wow, mm-hmm. That was the way it was, see, and this is how we think, the assimilation process works. Okay, today, that's no longer happening. Mm-hmm. And there's a very interesting book, I wish I had a title in front of me, Generations of Exclusionists by two sociologists from UCLA, both Hispanics. And they studied San Antonio and Los Angeles. And they repeated 2 surveys that were done 50 years ago. And they found that in the Hispanic communities, in those 2 communities, that the first generation, the immigrant was coming in, okay, he was getting a job, working hard. His children would get more education and do better than he ever did. Then the 3rd generation would fall off, do less well than the 2nd, and the 4th generation would fall off even further.
Why?
The conclusion of these 2 sociologists was that they were having to compete with continuing waves of people who were competing with them for the low-skilled jobs, and at the same time, we've exported a whole layer of jobs. We've exported that manufacturing base that immigrants traditionally moved into.
Yes.
So you've got this sort of ceiling, that has prohibited, the progressive growth of immigrant families, and they're continuing to have to compete with more and more, and that's where we get, why I say that I think liberals are failing here. The immigration reform bill in the Senate will increase legal immigration 3-fold. I mean, we take about 1.2 million immigrants a year. It'll increase it fully 3-fold. Within 20 years, we'll bring in the population of Canada.
Mm-hmm. But it'll be on a legal basis. It'll be organized. It'll be structured, and
right.
These will be legitimate immigrants, and that's what we want: legitimate immigrants.
Right.
We want whatever system we have, we should enforce that system instead of letting it all happen underfoot.
Right. But they justify that by the Congressional Budget Office did a survey of the whole thing, and they found that will actually increase the gross domestic product of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
But
so that's what you recommend?
Well, except the next, what most people ignore is that it will lower, and this is a Congressional Budget Office, it will lower the per capita gross domestic project. What do you call it?
Gross, yeah.
Product.
Yeah.
In other words, wages will be lowered and more people will be unemployed. So the benefit of increased immigration is basically a capital benefit, because of the product of the wages of this low-skilled workforce will accrue in the form of capital. Because of the increased numbers of workers, they've never repealed the law of supply and demand. You have more workers, more available workers, wages are going to go down.
So what would you do?
Well, it's tough. As I said earlier, I think we have to enforce the law. We have to legalize those that are here. There has to be, there have been 3 principles of our immigration policy for quite a number of years. 1 is family reunification. 2 is political asylum. And 3 is to provide needed workers in areas where they actually are needed. I think we've got to, we've got to accept that. I think, the Senate bill restricts the number of family members that are going to come here. They're going to stop allowing brothers and sisters of U.S. citizens to come. Mm-hmm. They're also going to, the adult children of citizens, I think over the age of 34, they're going to restrict. I think that's a mistake, because families reunify themselves, and if they can't do it legally, they're going to do it illegally. And particularly on the Mexican border, we have seen that so much, and it's caused the death of so many people.
Well, I think that's a central point, that you don't want to set it up to fail. You don't want to set it up so that people don't abide by it. You want to have reasonable laws to start with, and then you want to enforce them. You know, Michael, we're essentially out of time, and I think this is an extremely valuable discussion, and I would like to circle back with you maybe in a few weeks and continue where we left off. All the considerations, exactly what's going on in Congress, who's pushing what and why, and actually talk about what should happen now, piece by piece, provision by provision. I would really like to do that with you. And part of it is that I want to talk to you again in Ketchikan. It really turns me on to talk to you in Ketchikan.
Oh, great.
Anyway, thank you, Michael Harpold, longtime INS Border Patrol employee and a fellow who has studied immigration and immigration reform, believes that both sides are wrong in their own way on immigration reform, and has some wonderful ideas we ought to consider for immigration reform at this point. And although he's not great in chemistry, he's great in immigration reform. Thank you so much, Michael Harpold.
He's learned to write over the years, too.
Aloha. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.